I want to welcome everyone to the virtual conference, Defending the Amazon for Nature and for the People. And we hope that this finds you all well and safe today, given everything that's happening in the world. For those of you that are joining the second session, this event is hosted by All Eyes on the Amazon, and it's organized by 4 different organizations. It's organized by the Coordination of the Indigenous Organizations of the Amazon Basin, or CUECA, by the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, or ABPIB, by HEVOS, and also by Greenpeace. And my name is Kelly Matheson. I work for an international human rights organization called Witness, where I lead their videos evidence program, and I'm going to be facilitating the second conversation that we're having today that is going to be about global markets, local consequences, and specifically about deforestation, the degradation, and rights violations in the Amazon. So we're very lucky also today because to address this topic, we have 3 very experienced activists in this field with us today to engage in a dialogue. First, we have Michael Magaro. And Michael, can you wave? And we want to welcome you to, Michael is the Human Rights Coordinator at CUECA, and he's also a Forest Policy Officer and a GIS Specialist with the Amerindian Peoples Association of Guyana. So welcome, Michael. And next we have Karolina Zambrano. Karolina works at HEVOS, where she is the Program Director for All Eyes on the Amazon. And she brings over a decade of experience working on climate action and sustainability in Latin America. And prior to coming to HEVOS, she was the former Vice Minister of Science, Technology, and Innovation, as well as the Undersecretary for Climate Change for Ecuador. So welcome, Karolina. And finally, we have Oliver Salga. And Ali is the Program Leader for All Eyes on the Amazon at Greenpeace. And Ali has been an environmental activist for well over 25 years and with Greenpeace for that long as well, and deeply cares about forests. Ali has been a forest campaigner with Greenpeace in Germany, Canada, Finland, Russia, Indonesia, and now in Brazil. So welcome to all of you. And to the audience, in addition to hearing from the panelists, we really want to hear from all of you as well. So we invite anyone online to share questions in the Facebook chat or the Zoom chat about anything that you're curious about, or anything you'd like the panelists to address. Those questions will be sent to me, and then I will go ahead and ask those of the panelists. So finally, and on the logistics front, as Ileana mentioned at the very beginning, there is translation for those of you just joining. In the bottom of your Zoom bar, there's going to be a little icon that you can click for interpretation. And if you have any problems with that, just go ahead and put something in the chat, and we'll get back to you and figure out how to make that interpretation work for you. So, we ready to begin? So the conversation today, we're going to do 3 things. First, we're going to summarize what the problem is, and then look at solutions, and then look at opportunities to take action so that we can actually create concrete change on the ground in the Amazon. So to start with, about the situation, as I think we all recognize, the Amazon is facing tremendous amounts of threat from economic development that is also being hampered and being exacerbated by the political situation in many of the countries, as well as the actions of the extractive industries. And by extractive industries, I'm primarily meaning oil, gas, mining, timber, and the agriculture industries. Because these industries, they come into the Amazon, they take what they want legally or illegally, they sell it on the global markets, and they rarely fulfill the promises that they've made to the communities. And if they are extracting these resources legally, they often also fail to abide by the permit obligations that allows them to take these resources out in the first place. Then they take these resources, they export them, they offer often to the north, They distribute them on the global markets, they're bought, they're consumed, and then the cycle begins all over again. And it's this cycle that causes deforestation, pollution, and a violation of basic human rights, including violence and sometimes even the loss of life. So I'm going to go to the panelists now. And the first question we would like to ask is, from your knowledge and your experiences, could you summarize what the linkages are between deforestation, degradation, and human rights violations in the Amazon and the global markets and the consumption patterns around the world? And I'm also hoping so that we can gain a better understanding across the different extractive industries. I would love to ask you all if you could focus your answer on the linkage of specific industries and markets. So Michael, I'm hoping that you could address the links with the timber industry and illegal logging. Karolina, I'm hoping you could address the links between oil, gas, metals, and minerals. And Ollie, I'm hoping that you can look at the agricultural industry, soil and beef. And so Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you first. And I think you're on mute, Michael. There you
sorry.
Go. Oh, no worries.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kelly, for the question. I'll try to be brief and focus my answer specifically to the timber industry and what the timber industry has been doing. Across the Amazon, we have seen an increase in deforestation. We have seen an increase in degradation. And many times it's linked to the illegal harvesting of timber products. Many times it's linked to the agriculture industry. We have seen where large swaths of forests are destroyed so that feeding grounds can be created for the cattle industry. And this is only fueling the criminalization of our people. I mean, we have seen in Brazil recently where, you know, some of our leaders, some of our defenders have been killed. You know, why were they killed? They were killed because they're just trying to protect what is rightfully theirs. They were killed because they're trying to protect their homes, not just their homes, but, you know, the environment, the place where they get everything that they need. I think one of the things that we need to recognize is that the forest is our everything. For Indigenous peoples, it means quite a lot for us. And the timber industry, as well as the agriculture industry, has been really fueling a lot of distrust among our people. It's been fueling a lot of cases where our people are the receiving end of, you know, criminalization, as the receiving end of human rights violations, and not just being killed, but, you know, there's so many other things that comes there. Illegal logging continues to happen, and especially now with the COVID pandemic, what has happened is that the monitoring agencies are not able to effectively monitor. And even when they were monitoring, we know that illegal logging existed and continue to exist throughout the Amazon basin. However, now with the COVID pandemic, it has increased because there is no more oversight, and, you know, it's not a priority for governments as well to ensure that our lands are protected. I mean, even though our people have been trying to protect themselves, they've been locking themselves into their communities, reducing the amount of travels and monitoring trips that they can do. But this in itself has opened up a space where the illegal loggers are entering and doing more damage. We have seen in cases like Brazil where the policies are not very supportive of Indigenous people's rights. It's not supportive of ensuring that Indigenous fueled the customary lands. It's something, it's because of certain policies, like the policies in Brazil, for example, deforestation continues to happen, the degradation continues to happen. One of the things is that once we take the forest off the land, and then we do clear felling, and the clear felling is one of the things that happens. Once we do that, then it means that land over time will be degraded, because you have heavy machinery coming in to clear up the land. You have, because they have to do this so that grass can go properly and things like that. One last thing I'd like to touch on is the increase as well of illegal mining, which contributes to deforestation. And
so we have lost Michael. So hopefully he'll be able to come back. Can I go ahead? Michael, we just lost you for a minute. Can you try and finish your thought, and we'll see if we can hear you? Okay, so Michael's frozen. We're gonna try and get him back. But so can I go ahead and turn this over to Karolina to answer the question?
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly, and hello, everyone. I think I'm going to follow what... Oh, he's there.
Okay.
Let's see.
Go ahead, Michael. We lost you for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, my internet connection is unstable. Sorry about that. So I was going to say, my last point was that illegal logging, illegal mining also contributes to the degradation of our forests and degradation of what happens is that when the price of gold went up, you had miners coming with more heavy machinery, and this heavy machinery would destroy the land. The heavy machinery takes away the topsoil, which in itself results in that land being unable to support the new forest coming up. And this has been a challenge even in my own country, Guyana, where we have now open swaths of land as a result of mining, where no forest can grow now. I mean, they have tried replanting efforts, but it's not really working. And this is one of the other drivers of deforestation. And it's something that we need to curb, and we need to curb it urgently, because even now, in this time, in Guyana, mining is considered an essential service. We don't think mining is an essential service. It's one of the things that needs to be addressed, and one of the things that need to be prioritized, because mining can be the force that continues to spread COVID-19 in my own country. So that's what I want to say for now, and then we can talk some more later. Thank you.
Perfect. That is a great segue over to Karolina, who's will ideally focus on illegal mining, metals and minerals.
Yes, thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Michael. I think it's key what Michael said, because there's a great link and interconnection between everything that is going on in the Amazon, right? And perhaps people that haven't been to the Amazon, they relate deforestation, for example, with soy plantations or agricultural production, but I think it's very important to also focus on the link between oil, mining, extractive industries, and also, of course, the associated infrastructure development that comes with that, because that's putting an increasing pressure to the Amazon through global consumption patterns, and the Amazon has developed into like the next frontier for commodities, including gold, oil, copper, etc. Right? And when we talk about these extractive industries, for example, sometimes we hear even governments saying, okay, no, but it's a small oil platform that I'm going to put there. But then when you think that that comes together with a road that is opened up in the middle of the Amazon, that opens up the Amazon to colonization, to then illegal timber extraction and the associated degradation of the forest that is related to that. And then there's even a study by Carlos Larrea, who is a scientist from Ecuador, that says that approximately 1.7 kilometers each side is deforested next to a road. So when we open roads, we open a new infrastructure in the middle of the Amazon, we open the door to new problems and also even conflict related to land, resources, and rights, right? The other thing that is key here is, of course, what Michael was saying about illegal mining, especially related to the riverbeds and the direct deforestation that comes with that. And perhaps I think it is key not only to focus on deforestation and the loss of the forest itself, but the impacts of pollution related to oil spills, for example, that we have seen in the northern part of Peru, the northern part of Ecuador, and also, for example, what comes together with mining, both legal and illegal, and the use of mercury, for example, that then pollutes the water, and the water is key for the survival of the indigenous peoples and the local communities that live in the Amazon. So it's all interconnected in a way, and I think now in the pandemic, we can go back to rethinking that connectedness, right? Because we're reanalyzing the global supply chains and decoupling US and China production, for example, and perhaps this is the opportunity also for us to rethink global supply chains related to oil and mining. I think that with COVID specifically, there is a sort of a dangerous trend going on in the world right now, because some people are using that to justify that mining, for example, is less vulnerable to pandemics like COVID than other activities like tourism, for example, or ecotourism. And it is key for us to really reflect on this and take this as an opportunity also to rethink development in a way, right? Rethink development after COVID, trying to think about an economic recovery that is also sustainable, resilient, and of course respects the rights of indigenous peoples. This is the World Environment Day, and we always talk about nature-based solutions, but I think we need to start talking and positioning a lot the rights-based solutions.
Great. Thank you, Karolina. And Ali, can I go ahead and yes.
Yeah, welcome everybody. The link between deforestation, human rights violations, and the global market is quite obvious. The world is consuming products which are linked to deforestation globally. We mentioned mining products, timber, but also the agriculture sector is one of the driving forces of deforestation in many countries which host forests, tropical forests, not only in the Amazon, also in the Congo Basin forest or in Asia. I will concentrate a bit on Brazil, obviously, where I'm based. I'm working with Greenpeace Brazil since 6 years. And here we could see, looking at the pure statistics, how the global trade in commodities is driving deforestation. When I became 18 at the end of the 1980s, there was practically no soy plantations in the Amazon. Nowadays, we speak about nearly 5 million hectares of soy plantation within the Brazilian Amazon area, not mentioning the other countries such as Bolivia, where also a huge area is under planted soy. The production alone of soy tripled from the 1980s to the last year to over 100 million tons, and it became, after mines, the biggest export product from Brazil. Looking at other agriculture, particularly about the cattle, we have over 200 million cattle in Brazil, nearly 1 cattle per person. And lots of these cattle are raised in the Amazon, at the moment over 30 million. Again, when I was young, there was practically no cattle in the Amazon. They are now there because the growing of the cattle production and the meat production worldwide to feed our hunger comes also primarily from the Amazon region. And there the connection is quite easy. I will use an example Greenpeace published 2 weeks ago. It's about an indigenous land which is called Ituna Itatá. It's close to the Belo Dam, this famous hydro dam which has been constructed quite violently in the 2000s to produce energy, ignoring a number of environmental and human rights regulations and laws. And in the aftermath of this production of the hydro dam, there is the area Ituna Itatá, where there is living 1 or 2 groups of isolated indigenous people. Isolated indigenous people are indigenous groups which voluntarily isolate themselves from the non-indigenous world They have no contacts to the Brazilian white or black society to stay safe in the forest. The area where these groups live, where we still don't know the name they gave themselves, which they live in an area of 150,000 hectares. And in the last 3 years, the deforestation in this area was so dramatic that it is ranking on #1 in the indigenous lands in Brazil on deforestation. Nearly 20,000 hectares have been destroyed in this area, and nearly all the area is already marked by cattle farmers to be used for cattle ranching. So what we see in this area is a dramatic increase of deforestation, a dramatic increase of destruction, and this will lead very, very likely and very sad to the extinction of these indigenous groups. Why is this now connected to the global market? Because the meat which is produced already within this area, Greenpeace did an overflight over this area in the last September, and we saw within the indigenous lands, Ituna Itata, cattle, fences, cabins, machines, so everything which shows clearly that there is a production of meat happening. And we could trace some of the farmers who claim this land in the Ituna Itata as theirs. This land is stolen, yeah? We need to be very honest. This indigenous land has been embargoed for any further development, and lots of farmers moved in to claim over 1,000 hectares their own, completely illegal, and are going now to produce cattle in these areas. One of these farmers, to use that example, has sold cattle to a farm which sells meat to Mafrig and to JBS. These two big meat producers in the world. JBS is the biggest meat producer in the world, and Mafrig is another big one, particularly here in Brazil. And both of them sell cattle meat products to the international market, primarily to the Asian market, but also to the European market. So these companies here in Brazil, which are global players, they knowingly get involved in cases of deforestation or human rights violations and make the consumer, wherever the consumer sits, in China, in Germany, or in other countries, a partner in crime, because these companies know what they are doing. The consumer not necessarily know that, but they make them a partner in crime. And unfortunately, these companies have still not managed to completely close their so-called chain of custody, the following of the meat from the cattle where it is born to the slaughterhouse and then to the supermarket. They did a huge effort from 2009 onwards, after they have been beaten the first time from the global community about their involvement. They did a program to trace their cattle. They did it. They could trace for real pretty much all the direct suppliers. But what they have not fixed yet is the indirect suppliers. And there is lots of indirect suppliers, yeah. One sells to another one, and this another one sells directly to the company. And exactly this link between the unknown is still not tackled. And one of those companies, Mafrig, to use that example, they openly say that they don't know about 50% of their cattle supply, where the cattle come from. It does not mean that these 50% of cattle come from dodgy sources or from deforestation, but it can be. And they don't know, and they should know. And that is, in fact, a stimulation of crime in this complete lack of law enforcement, which we are seeing nowadays in the Bolsonaro government's time, where all authorities who are traditionally have taken care of the forest or of the protection of indigenous people are completely dismantled and practically put to a position where they can't do their job anymore.
So all of you touched on the different rights violations that are happening because of these extractive industries. Michael, you mentioned the violence. Karolina, you mentioned the water. Ali, you mentioned the extinction of indigenous people and the loss of territory. Before we move on to solutions, I want to dive a little bit deeper into how the global markets and consumption patterns are impacting indigenous people and their human rights. if Michael, if you can speak to the right to self-determination, that would be amazing, but also feel free to, speak to whatever you want. Karolina, if you can speak to well-being, that would be lovely. And Ollie, if you can touch a little bit more deeply on territory. But again, if there's other points that you all want to make, then please do. So I'll turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Kelly. Very interesting listening to the other panelists as well. In terms of self-determination, as Indigenous peoples over the years, we have seen where our rights to determine what we want to do for ourselves, basically it was taken away. Since the colonists came, our rights were taken away to make decisions for ourselves. And I think it's only now that we're really seeing, and maybe because of the visibility as a result of the different platforms and social platforms and other things, that we have seen and heard more people talking about what our rights are and how we can fix those things. One of the things that Indigenous peoples have is that our right needs to be recognized to free, prior, and informed consent. When we be involved in any decision which will impact us in any way at all. And that decision must be free from any sort of coercion, any sort of bribery, any sort of intimidation. It must be us as Indigenous peoples deciding this is what we want to do. And I think over the years, what has happened is that Indigenous peoples have been reduced to being less than humans. This is what people think, and people believe that we're not able to make decisions on our own. And this is so wrong. As Indigenous peoples, we have ancestral knowledge which was passed down for many generations. We have been the ones managing our forests for many generations, sustainably, may I add. And these are things that need to be recognized. Over the years, our rights to our lands has been taken away. As Indigenous peoples, we have been able to manage our lands. The issue came about when governments fail to recognize our lands. They want to determine which lands belong to us as Indigenous peoples, when we know for many generations we have been managing certain pieces of lands as our own territories. We must be able to determine which land belongs to us. I mean, in reality, it's a whole lot of land, but I know as Indigenous peoples, we just want what is rightfully ours. One of the issues that come up as a result of titling and demarcation is that many times governments decide what a people may deserve, what a people should get as their land, which should not be. Many times our lands, which we know to be ours, are cut. We're just given a little piece and not given what rightfully belongs to us. This is wrong. We should be able to determine that. Additionally, in our communities, we have an understanding of what development is. We should be able to determine what we want as development. Many times outsiders see development as roads, as infrastructure. But what we see is that these things bring more destruction to our lands. We see them as bringing more issues, more social issues. They bring more mineral interests, more logging interests, which in itself destroys the social fabric of our communities, which in itself degrades the land around our territories, which causes deforestation, which causes the criminalization of our people, because we have conflicts coming up as a result of these outside interests coming closer to us. So we should be able to determine on our own what we know as development. Development may not be the road that you're seeing. For us, development might be staying locked off from all of those outside influences. So these are things that we should be able to determine as Indigenous peoples, because that's our right. As human beings, we have that basic right to have that determining what we need as something that can help us as a people. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Ollie, but I mean, Michael, not only is it a basic human right to self-determination and free, prior, and informed consent, it is embedded in law. So it is a legal right, a moral right, an ethical right, and a basic human right. So, Ollie?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think you touched there one point which is obviously seen. In the Amazon, we have a fight on land. It's all about who is owning the land and can use this land for future purposes. We mentioned a few of them, gold, timber, or agriculture products, but there's also the speculation for looking into future prospects. And this fight on land is a violent fight because it comes from, in brackets, outsiders, either from other parts of the country or even from companies who are foreign companies who have a dependence in the various countries in the Amazon basin. And using again another example, in Maranhão, a Brazilian state with this in the area where the Amazon is already meeting another ecosystem, the Cerrado, there lives a huge number of indigenous people too, which are partnering with us in the Olas in the Amazon project, the group AWA. And the AWA have a territory where there is also still indigenous people living in self-isolation. There is indigenous people who live with contacts to the non-indigenous world, and part of the territory is completely filled with cattle. Illegal cattle in the territory of the Awa indigenous group. And here we see classically the fight on land. There is farmers who wants to increase their cattle production. There is a forest which in their eyes is empty because there lives only indigenous people, which don't have a huge value in Brazil in the current times. And there comes farmers with guns and they meet indigenous people with arrow and bow. This does not mean that all indigenous people have arrow and bows, but the Awa have. They are quite very traditional in this regard. And you can imagine how the fight looks like when the Kalashnikov meets an arrow and bow. The result will be dead indigenous people and the cattle will move in, and exactly that happened. And unfortunately, this violence in the field against those forest guardians who are trying to protect the forest for centuries and doing this still nowadays has resulted in numerous deaths just in the last few months. Only from November till today, 4 indigenous people have been killed. Those ones who have been involved in defending the territories, those who call themselves forest guardians, 2 people in Maranhão, 1 person recently in the state of Rondônia, and this all were leaders who were outspoken against this fight of land, this stealing of land, and this invasion of indigenous territories. So we practically see in Brazil daily human rights violations, particularly against the indigenous peoples' communities, but also against local communities. It's not only about indigenous, the local communities are as well suffering from this huge wave of companies or big farmers who are trying, and very often unfortunately successful, steal their land because they simply say, if you don't leave, I will kill you. And then they kill, and then people going to leave.
Karolina, can I ask you to weigh in?
I just wanted to start by complimenting what Oli was saying, because that reality that is being experienced in Brazil is also happening in other places in Latin America. And just like, just to add some data to that, for example, in 2019, 135 human rights and environmental defenders were killed in Latin America. So with these extractive industries and the agribusiness and also illegal timber extraction comes conflict. 40% of the conflict that is experienced in the world, environmental conflicts, affects directly indigenous territories. And with that, I won't go deeper into that. Of close comes insecurity, integral security of defenders as people and also of organizations, and also violence. But I think that beyond that, it's very important to also focus on the impacts on other rights. For example, access to water, food security and sovereignty, of course, and also health impacts. Because as I mentioned before, there's a deforestation part, but there's also the pollution and environmental degradation of the different ecosystems that exist in the Amazon. And when we think of, for example, of having these high concentrations of toxic metals in the water or in the land or in the soil, sorry, related to oil production and oil activity, and also related to mining, that directly impacts the health of the indigenous peoples and local communities that live in the Amazon. We are talking about cancer rates and also affections to the skin, for example, and really high concentrations of toxic metals in the blood. And a lot of even unknown impacts of those activities directly in the health of the people. When the forest disappears or when the water is polluted, of course, that also affects food security and food sovereignty. And we are seeing that increasingly. And what we're seeing right now is that, of course, because of these impacts, some indigenous communities depend on access to other local markets for access to water and food. And now with the lockdown measures and the restrictions in mobility that we're experiencing because of COVID, the impacts, mainly indirect impacts of lockdown measures in access to food and access to water are even worse. So that's why we're also experiencing a humanitarian crisis, because what we are seeing is that people not only are impacted directly by the virus, but also their food security and their access to water is being directly impacted by the COVID-related measures that the governments and even the communities are also implementing to reduce the impacts of COVID in them. But of course, this is a humanitarian crisis, and that's why in the previous session, for example, Gregorio was talking about the Amazon Emergency Fund, and Greenpeace and EVOS were working a lot, not only to try to support a better access to public health systems by indigenous communities, but also to respond to these immediate needs that have arisen because of the lack of access to local markets related to food and also to water, right? And then Michael also touched upon this briefly, but I think it's key to also try to understand the relationship and the cosmovision of indigenous peoples and the relationship to the forest and to the land and the cultural impacts that deforestation and forest degradation can have in them, in the cosmovision and the intervention, for example, in sacred places, etc., etc. So I would say conflict, security, and violence, of course, health, access to water and food, and culture and cosmovision, besides, of course, everything related to land rights that are directly affected, like Michael and Oli said.
Thank you so much. So I think at this point in the conversation, we've basically, you know, Ollie really summarized that we have massive exports and massive growth. Karolina, you really summarized really well the domino effect. When we open up a road, we open up the forest. And then I think you've all summarized the massive amounts of rights that are associated with these extractive industries, from water to toxicity to food security to self-determination. And as Michael opened, talking about how the forest is everything to indigenous people, right? But not only is the forest everything to indigenous people, the Amazon rainforest, as we all know, is one of the largest carbon sinks in the world. And climate change is a massive problem that all humanity faces. And so it's similar to COVID in that way, right? It's a global problem. Well, if we don't stop climate change, if we don't mitigate and return the atmosphere to being healthy, then we're going to exacerbate all of our other major problems, whether it's war, poverty, migration, medical, health, etc. So the health of the Amazon rainforest, the health of humanity is really dependent on the health of the Amazon rainforest. So this isn't just a problem for the communities that live there, certainly on a day-to-day, but it's a problem for all of us. So I want to move us towards solutions. And we've had a couple of questions from the audience about solutions as well. I'm hoping that you can share with us some of the strategies that indigenous people have used locally. Look at some of the strategies that have been used nationally. Karolina, if you could address that, and Ollie, some of the strategies that have been used internationally, right? To solve these problems, to protect these communities, to protect the rights for indigenous people. And then there's some specific questions in terms of logging, for example, that Michael, you might be able to address. Are there any products coming out of the Amazon that we should not be buying? Are there any minerals that we should limit our use to? So if you could speak to both the strategies that are being used and what we should do as consumers, that would be amazing. And Michael, I'll go back to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Indeed, what are the solutions and what have we been doing? There are several things that need to be addressed for us to really start the process of moving forward in terms of how we can help save humanity, how we can help humanity stay on the ground. My first solution is land recognition. Recognizing the rights of indigenous peoples by having them titled and demarcated. Numerous studies have shown that indigenous peoples, where their lands are, where they have titled lands, there is less deforestation, there is less destruction of those lands. So the solution to ensuring that our forest is kept intact is by recognizing our indigenous people's lands, giving them titles to those lands. Because we have been able to manage our forests for many generations in a sustainable manner. So that's, I think, one of the main solutions to this issue. Secondly, governments need to recognize indigenous people's right to free, prior, and informed consent. I think this is key in all of this. And like you said earlier as well, this is in law. The UN Declaration talks to this, the ILO Convention talks to this, 169. So it is important for us, for governments to recognize our right to be consulted, and this must be done without any sort of coercion or anything. So it must be free, prior, and informed. Thirdly, there must be an effort by governments, by state agencies to stop criminalizing our leaders. Too many of our leaders are being killed. Too many of our leaders are being criminalized. Why? Just because they are defending the rights of their people. And this must stop. This is wrong, right? So that's 3. Fourth, there must be direct financing coming to indigenous peoples. Many times we have financing coming for indigenous peoples, but it does not reach indigenous peoples. And I think this is something that needs to be addressed. Sometimes a lot of the financing goes to consultants and really nothing comes out of what they're doing. So there must be more direct financing coming to indigenous people so that they must receive this. And 5, there must be recognition of our ancestral knowledge. Indigenous peoples, our elders have so much knowledge, which they have used for many generations in terms of managing and sustaining our people. And there must be recognition of this. There must be respect for this knowledge. And we believe that with indigenous people's knowledge, ancestral knowledge, and of course the knowledge that's from today, the scientists, they have quite a lot of information as well. Together we can solve the issues. We can find solutions to climate change. I mean, we all know what the solution is in terms of keeping our forest standing, but what are we doing to ensure it keeps standing? This is something that we need to really talk about and really have more open discussions on this, because many times people fail to understand how their lives impact nature and how by their life impact in nature, it ultimately affects climate change. I tell people, when I was much younger, when I was a little boy, we knew when it was going to rain. We knew when it was going to be dry. But now all of that has changed. What does it mean for us as a people on the ground? It means that all the seasons have changed, so we don't know when to farm. We don't know when is the best time to farm. We don't know when certain seasonal animals will come, our food sources. We don't know these things because everything has changed now. So climate change is having a direct impact on indigenous communities already. We're feeling it on the ground. Yes, we see scientists have reports of what is happening around the world, but we are feeling it directly too, because we are there, we're part of nature. We coexist with nature, and because of that, we feel the direct impacts. So indigenous people understand that. So those five, I think, are like a starting point of some of the priority things that we can do to help to find solutions to this whole issue. In terms of products that may be coming from the Amazon, I know for a fact that in some countries, and some of you may have heard of this, there have been voluntary partnership agreements which were developed between Amazonian countries, and there's other countries around the world as well. But for example, in South America, we have like Guyana, who was involved in a negotiation. So the whole intention of this is to ensure that no illegal product, timber products get into the chain of custody. So I'm aware that internationally as well, you can see products, you can ask for a certificate of the source of that product, because many times it's hard to trace back where a product may have come from. And I think consumers need to be a little bit more cautious in terms of, like, you know, ask, dig behind the story, find out. I know, yes, you may want this particular hardwood, but try to understand the story of that hardwood. Where does it come from? You know, what certification does it have? I mean, in Guyana, eventually, I know they will have what they call a FLECT certificate, which just says that, you know, it went through a certain process before getting here. And I think consumers need to pay more attention to that. You know, there is a green heart on the market. Where did it come from? You know, how did it get here? Show me the papers, the trail of how this product got to the store. You know, these are things, the questions that we need to start asking as consumers. So I'll just stop here for now. Thank you.
Michael, that platform is not only clear and articulate, every single step on it is realistic. So I'm gonna turn it over to Karolina for more realistic solutions.
Thank you, Kelly. And before going into specific examples, I would also like to complement what Michael was saying and refer specifically to women, because we have talked about the problems and not necessarily talked about so far about the direct impact that climate change and also the deforestation and forest degradation has on women, because women have the specific relationship with the chakra, which is like the traditional production systems, and also with health and the care of the family. So they are directly even more impacted by all these activities that we're mentioning. So when we're talking about the recognition and of those rights, of Indigenous people's rights, I would also like to bring the attention to the need to also focus specifically on women rights, and also the specific policies and programs and interventions that would help to reduce the inequality that also exists in the Indigenous populations, and also try to address the direct impact that all these global crises, the climate crisis, and also in general the inequality has on women, and then how we can also think about the specific solutions for them. In terms of the rights, like Michael was saying, I think it's key not only to recognize those rights, but guarantee that they can be exercised by the Indigenous peoples and the local communities, because as you said, the law is there, but it's not necessarily being enforced. So what I would say in terms of solutions, we can talk about solutions related to transparency and accountability and law enforcement. And here there are specific examples with the work that we do as All Eyes on the Amazon in relation to the use of technologies and also video, as you mentioned at the beginning, to document what's going on in terms of human rights violations, deforestation, and forest degradation in the Amazon and Indigenous territories, but use that information, the evidence that we can collect through the use of technologies to actually act. So, and there are different ways of acting, right? One can be strategic litigation and taking legal action to actually guarantee the full exercise of the Indigenous rights, and especially land rights related to Indigenous territories, right? That's one specific part that we have seen working, for example, here in Ecuador by our partner Alianza Seibo, and the failure of the state, of the government, to actually guarantee the exercise of the right of free, prior and informed consent, and also the self-determination. So that's a specific case where we have seen the power of technology as a tool to document human rights violations, and the key part of using that technology and that evidence collected for strategic litigation and taking legal action even against the government. But I would also like to add a specific example where communities not necessarily face the government, but also work for the co-management of protected areas, like traditional protected areas, which is the case of Eca Maraca area in Peru. There we also use technologies to monitor illegal activity, especially illegal mining in the Amazon, in the Peruvian Amazon, but then that is being used both by the Protected Area Service in the government and also the local communities to protect the land, right? And protect the Amazon and try to do something about it. So I would say that all the work related to transparency and accountability, what we can do with the use of technologies and how we can collect evidence to then act through litigation, through, for example, I'm sure Oli will talk about this, communications and campaigns to actually get action even beyond the national nation states, I think is key. And I would also like to add something specifically related to Latin America, which is the Escazu Agreement. I don't know if a lot of people have heard about it, but it is a key international agreement that is related to environmental democracy and human rights related to the environment. And we are in a key moment right now because Ecuador, for example, ratified it and put the instrument in the UN, I think 2 weeks ago, and there are only 2 countries missing for it to fully enter into force. It is only for Latin America, but I think it can set a precedent and a model even for the world in terms of access to information and decision-making related to environmental issues and also the protection of the rights of human rights and environmental defenders. So hopefully that will happen in the next few weeks maybe, because there's only two specific countries missing from the ratification part. And then even countries without it and having fully entry into force are already adapting specific policies and also laws in order to be able to comply with that international agreement. So I think action related to that and to access to information and environmental democracy itself are also part of the solutions, besides of what I mentioned related to transparency and accountability and law enforcement.
So Ollie, I'm going to turn it over to you. And it seems like everyone is rolling the solutions into the call to action together, which is absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, solutions obviously have certain levels. Yeah, in the Olas on the Amazon project, we work on the one hand on the basic level to really give those indigenous people who are defending the forest on their daily life a voice. Yeah, because they are in the forest, they don't have internet, they often don't have a connection to the world. So one solution here is obviously to give those people a voice to speak themselves. They don't need translation, they can speak themselves at international levels or national levels about what's going on in their forest. What goes on is that they can't go in the forest, not even in the COVID times, but also before not. They can't go hunting because in the forest are illegal loggers. In the forest is illegal gold miners. They aiming to kill them. They have death threats. So they can't organize the food they have organized in the past, in peaceful times, when their territories are not invaded. Nowadays, they tell me, we can't go to the nut trees and pick the nuts, which are a big income for them once a year when the nuts fall down. They can't go there because they're risking their life. And the recent killings which happened in Brazil show us that this is not just something they threaten you and they kill. So this is unfortunately the truth, and Brazil is the country, use that as an example, with the most killed environmental defenders in 2019. So it's nothing which is like in Germany, when somebody says, I will beat you up. Well, I'm a German, so I can say that. That may happen, may not happen, but here it happens. So these solutions that to give those indigenous people who are defending the forest a voice is one part. And the other part, obviously, is to try to communicate and to help people outside of Brazil understand what products they are buying on a daily basis and how they are linked to deforestation, human rights violation. Michael spoke a lot about timber. We can use one species which from the Amazon is heavily exported nowadays. It's a tree species, Ipe. Formerly it was mahogany in the 2000s. Mahogany is pretty much extinct in the wild. Yeah, it exists, but not in the level that you can use it for commercial purpose anymore. So what the loggers do, they go for the next species, and the next best species is Ipe. You will not find it on the international market as Ipe. The market is clever. They call it now Brazilian walnut, because walnut, there is nothing wrong with walnut. Walnut grows everywhere. In Europe, it's a tree used, but now it's called Brazilian walnut. But the fact it's Ipe. Ipe is this very beautiful tree which you see when you fly over the Amazon. It is flowering in yellow or in purple, a very huge tree, magnificent. And they grow alone in the forest. So they are very, very rare. So don't buy this Ipe tree. There is no certification. There is no chain of custody. Nobody can prove that the Ipe they are selling is from legal non-destruction. This simply didn't exist. We have proven that numerous times with research done in the Brazilian timber industry. There is other products, and obviously we go back to meat and to products which are related to meat, which is soy, which animals eat. And it's not cattle, yeah, it's chicken and pig who eat mainly soy. And the destruction of the Amazon for soy, the destruction of the Cerrado or the Pampa for soy in other South American countries leads to this brutal growing of meat industry, where you can buy a chicken in Europe cheaper than a chocolate. Why this is cheaper? Because it eats this cheap soy, which is produced without recognition of any law. And obviously when you produce outside of legality, when you steal land, this is cheaper than when you need to take care of everything, because taking care of everything costs money. So our production in South America on this product and the consumption in the rest of the world of milk, cheese, eggs, chicken meat or pork meat, or at the end also cattle meat, is linked to that. So if one really wants to take care of the forest, one needs to reduce the meat consumption. Maybe we should turn it around. It's not a meatless Monday. It's a Monday with meat. From Tuesday to Sunday, there is no meat. This really will help the world, and this is an action everybody can do. So let's forget the meatless Monday. Let's go for 1 week, 1 day with meat in the week and the others not. And then there's of course specific products like gold. Yeah, every computer has gold. Gold gets out, and last statistic I saw from the Brazilian state of Roraima. This is a state close to the border to the north. There is the Yanomami people living heavily impacted by illegal gold mining. And in the whole state is no existing legal gold mine, but the state produces 700 kilos of gold every year, which goes for export. In the whole industry, in jewelry and computering and so on. So sometimes it's really hard for the consumer to find out where the products are in. And I think we should get active there where it's more easy, which is tropical timber, which is meat, and which is products which are feed with soy, which we don't even see the soy at the end. We see the chicken, but the chicken eats pretty much the soy. You're mute, Kelly?
Yes, thank you. Ali, before we go to the closing remarks, where we'll have each of you wrap up for about 1 minute your thoughts. There's a question that came in about what type of strategies are being implemented or should be implemented, so those of us that live in urban landscapes can have our awareness raised about the reality of Indigenous people living in the Amazon and the violations that are happening to the communities down there. So if you could address that question, and then I'll give you 1 minute for closing wrap comments and anything you want to say, particularly about a call to action, that would be great. And then we'll go to Karolina and we'll end with Michael. Ali?
I will start. Sorry, I haven't heard that. I will start. Yeah, well, I think everybody can take actions every day. Consumption, buying things in the supermarket is pure politics. We choose what we buy. We choose if we buy the meat or that meat or no meat. We choose if we buy this timber or not, although we don't consume so much timber. Yeah, I'm not buying every day new timber. But if you do once, you buy it for a long time. You have your wardrobe for 20 years. if you buy with real timber. So there is a choice to make for a piece which is in your room or in your house for a long time. Maybe it becomes even a friend because you see it every day. So choose wise what you're buying. So when we consume, we need to think first, and then we need to make this political decision. I think this is very, very important. And the second is that from a strategic point of view, I think we need to more put efforts on it, that the people who are living in the tropical rainforest regions, not only in the Amazon, but also in the other two big tropical regions in the world, that they are doing the fight for all of us. We will not be able to keep the climate change below 1.5 degrees if we continue to destroy the rainforests. So these forest defenders are defending the forest for us as well, and that's why we need to stand in solidarity with them. They will not be able to win this fight against machine guns without our solidarity, although the solidarity don't help them when they go in the forest and maybe being confronted from illegal logger. But this solidarity, if we speak about it, if we share it, this can help from a broad point of view, that the governments in the world, the media in the world, and the companies in the world say, we don't want to get involved in this anymore. We don't want to be partners in crime, what is going on in the rainforest, and that's why we act. And everybody, of course, can ask what the governments in the world are doing on development aid, where the money really goes, what they're doing on business relation, where the money really goes. And that's, of course, brings then suddenly London, Berlin, Paris, or Madrid together with the capitals here in South America.
Thank you. And so then Karolina, will go to you to complement what Ollie has said before we sign off for this panel.
Yes, I think I will focus on three things. First, create new connections, because right now we're talking a lot about social distancing, but I would like to think it's more physical distancing, and with technology like we're seeing right now, we can take this opportunity to create new connections and listen to the stories of the indigenous peoples and indigenous youth, for example, and voices through online platforms, and also specific products like ebooks or testimonies or things like that, so that people in the cities or in the global north or in the US can connect to the reality of the indigenous peoples that live in the Amazon. So create new connections, that's one part. Then a lot of attention is put into the consumption patterns and the consumers and your choice, right? But I would say that it's important not only to change your individual action, but actually organize and also make your voices louder in terms of having specific messages being sent to companies, to governments, etc., so that we can create more structural change. And then Ollie touched upon this a little bit, but I think it's also very important to get involved into politics, because your vote can change the climate and your vote can save the Amazon too. And it's not only who votes for Bolsonaro in Brazil, but actually your vote and the decisions you make and the involvement in the political action related to Europe, to the Netherlands, to the US, because those, not only the foreign aid policies, but trade policies also, and the specific regulations that are being set for companies based abroad can have a direct impact also in the Amazon, right? And in Latin America in general. So I would say, like, create connections, organize, and also vote for the right people.
Perfect. So before we go, Michael, I'm going to have you close us out, and then I'll wrap us up with some closing details. And so, Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kelly. And you asked a question just before we did this rapid sessions. And one of the things, like one of the strategies that we're using as Indigenous peoples is that we're creating spaces where Indigenous youth, especially, can tell the stories from their perspective. We are working with young people, teaching them how to use the technology that is available to make videos, to tell their stories, because what we have found in the past is that people from the outside trying to tell our story, do not really bring it over in what it really is. And we believe that we should be the ones telling our own stories. So what we are doing is that we're helping young people to learn the the tools that they can use to help to tell these stories. And I think it's a very interesting thing, because what I have found is that it has created a space now where even the young people are interacting more with the elders, because now they're talking with the elders to find out, so what is the story behind this mountain? What is the story behind that river? How did it get its name? So they learning, and I think this is one of the ways that they too will hold on and continue with the struggle for their lands, because they know the story behind it. And I think it's one of the things that is really beneficial for us. Additionally, what we're doing is that we are monitoring our land. So we're using GPS-enabled smartphones to go out there and to see what is happening, to see if there's any sort of environmental degradation. We're mapping our important sites, our spiritual sites, mountains, rivers. And it's something that as Indigenous people, we always say, every little creek has a name. However, outsiders wouldn't know that. So it's one of the things that we're doing to say, look, here what, we're the ones who name these places. These places are special to us because we have walked these lands, for many generations. And, sometimes in my work, I go and I walk for many miles, sometimes days, through lands, through trails which were, made by my ancestors. They didn't have GPS and other equipment in those days, but they made those trails. However they did it, they made it. So we're doing this as a way of ensuring that we can provide evidence. Many times I think in the past, people misunderstood us when we talk, because we may call a name, but they don't know where this place is. But if I can show you on a map, this is where I'm talking about, this place has this name, then I think it gives you more of a visual in terms of understanding what it is that I'm trying to tell you, right? So we're using these technology available to us to help our people understand as well that here what, this is the way we need to present our information to them. So we're going as far as using like remote sensing technology to ensure that we have a better understanding of the landscape as well, that we'd be able to defend our landscape to any party. So for me, I would like to encourage all out there to play their part. Everybody, every action has a reaction. And everything that I do as an individual will have some sort of impact in the long term on nature. And we need to pay attention to our carbon footprints. We know that it's the greenhouse gases which is causing the ozone layer to be destroyed. The atmosphere is getting much hotter, which is causing global warming. The seas will rise and things like this. But it all adds up because we as individuals as well are doing little things that will impact that in some way or the other. So we need to be more conscious in terms of what it is that we can do to help save the planet. And I think one of the easiest things that I tell people to do is that reconnect with nature. Reconnect with nature. Take some time away from your city life and go a little bit, go into the fields and experience something else other than the city. And I think the more we have people connected with nature, I think it's more people will become conscious and realize and begin to do things which will help to keep nature in its pristine state. Well, we have gone past pristine now, but help keep nature at a stable level where we're able to live in a peaceful and free earth and happy earth. So that's been my statements now. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Michael, and a great way to close the session. So I want to thank all of you as activists, as experts, as humans, as part of the global community, for taking us through the problems, which there are many, taking us through the human rights violations, which there are many, but then offering us very concrete, very realistic solutions. Michael, you outlined a 5-part platform, which we can go back and we can summarize in online for everybody. And then there's ways to achieve that platform. Like we talked about voting, we talked about organizing, we talked about making new connections, we talked about gathering the documentation and using it and leveraging it in strategic litigation. So all of these different tools can be used to achieve that 5-part platform that Michael so eloquently set out. And I just want to close with what a few of you mentioned about stories, and what, Michael, you really brought home to us about the young people telling their stories and giving voice to the Indigenous communities. Because it was a 18-year-old named Esther Shirley, a climate activist, that said to me once when I was talking to her, a true listener listens with the willingness to help. And I think that that's what we all need to do as a global community, is listen to these Indigenous communities on the ground, ask, like, what is going to make a difference, and understand the backstory, and then take action. So I want to thank you all. I want to remind us that this video event is going to be available on HIVA's Facebook account and on the All Eyes on the Amazon YouTube channel. So you can listen to it again and see Michael's 5-part platform. And then we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in 5 minutes here so that we can continue with the last session, which is on Indigenous advocacy and campaigning, how Indigenous people are taking action to protect their rights in the Amazon. And we're going to be able to have a conversation with Sonia Guajajara, who's the General Coordinator of the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples in Brazil. So come back in 5 minutes, and thank you, everyone.